The storm arrived with terrifying suddenness, as if the mountain had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One moment, the air was heavy and still, the sky dull but manageable. The next, everything changed. The wind rose sharply, slamming into his body with a force that stole his breath and threw off his balance. Snow erupted from the ground and sky alike, swirling violently until the landscape dissolved into chaos. There was no gradual warning, no time to prepare. The mountain shifted from quiet endurance to open hostility in a matter of seconds. The temperature dropped rapidly, turning the air into something sharp and painful to inhale. Each breath burned his lungs, and the cold seeped through layers of clothing that had protected him until now. The suddenness of the storm was its greatest danger. He had planned for harsh weather, but not for an attack this fast and this overwhelming. The mountain had closed the distance between challenge and survival without giving him the chance to adapt. Snow whipped across his face, stinging his skin and blinding his vision. The world shrank to a few uncertain steps ahead, and even those felt unreliable. Familiar shapes vanished, erased by the storm's fury. The ground beneath him became unstable, hidden beneath shifting layers of ice and snow. Each step felt like a gamble, and the fear of slipping or stepping into nothingness tightened his chest. The storm did not roar loudly at first. It screamed through the wind, relentless and chaotic, making it difficult to think, to hear, or even to orient himself. Panic threatened to take hold, but he fought it with every ounce of focus he had left. He forced himself to slow his breathing, to steady his movements, knowing that fear could be just as deadly as the storm itself. Yet even as he struggled for control, the mountain pressed harder. Gusts struck from unpredictable directions, pushing against him like invisible hands, testing his balance and strength. It felt as though the mountain were actively trying to force him off the slope, to remind him how fragile his presence truly was. Time lost its meaning as the storm intensified. Seconds blurred into minutes, and the distance he had traveled became impossible to judge. The sky darkened unnaturally, and daylight faded behind thick clouds of snow. He realized with growing dread that he was trapped. Retreat was no longer an option, and pressing forward blindly carried its own deadly risks. The storm had taken control of the mountain, sealing him within its reach. In that moment, he understood that this was not just bad weather. It was a turning point. The mountain had revealed its first truly cruel face, unleashing its power without hesitation or warning. The climb was no longer about endurance or patience. It was about survival against a force that did not care whether he was ready or not. As the storm tightened its grip, his sense of direction began to dissolve. What had once been a recognizable slope with subtle landmarks and familiar contours vanished behind a wall of blowing snow. Visibility collapsed to just a few feet, and even that was unreliable, constantly shifting as gusts of wind hurled snow across his field of view. The mountain erased depth, distance, and shape, turning the world into a disorienting blur of white and gray. He could no longer tell where the ground ended and the sky began. And that loss of visual certainty made every step feel dangerously uncertain. The wind became a force that dictated his movement rather than merely resisted it. It struck from unpredictable angles, pushing him sideways, backward, and sometimes forward against his will. Each gust threatened to knock him off balance, forcing him to widen his stance and slow his pace. He lowered his head instinctively, but even then, snow found its way into his eyes, his mouth, his collar. The simple act of standing upright demanded concentration. Control, something he had relied on until now, slipped further from his grasp with every passing minute. Landmarks he had memorized the day before were gone, buried beneath drifting snow or hidden by the storm's relentless motion. A rock outcrop, a rise in the terrain, a slight curve in the slope, none of it mattered anymore. The mountain had wiped the slate clean, leaving him with no reference point, no clear sense of progress or retreat. He turned slowly in place, searching for any familiar shape, but the storm offered nothing in return. The realization hit hard. He was navigating blind in an environment where a single wrong step could lead to disaster. The psychological impact of this loss of control was immediate and intense. Without visual cues, doubt crept into every decision. Was he still on solid ground or nearing a dangerous edge? Was he moving uphill or drifting sideways without realizing it? The storm forced him to question instincts he had trusted his entire life. Each movement required conscious thought, and even then, certainty remained out of reach. The mountain had stripped away his ability to plan ahead, reducing survival to the present moment. He stopped moving, understanding that forward motion without direction could be fatal. Standing still in such cold was dangerous, but moving blindly was worse. He planted his feet, anchoring himself against the wind, and tried to regain some sense of orientation through feel rather than sight. He listened to the wind, felt the slope beneath his boots, and focused on maintaining balance. Control, he realized, was no longer about choosing a path, but about minimizing risk. In that frozen, chaotic moment, the mountain taught him a brutal lesson. When visibility disappears and control is lost, survival depends on restraint as much as action. The storm had reduced his world to instinct, patience, and decision-making under extreme uncertainty. It was no longer a climb guided by confidence or planning. It was a fight to remain upright, aware, and alive in a place where the mountain dictated every condition and every consequence. As the storm raged on, the cold reached a level that felt almost unreal, transforming from discomfort into something sharp and punishing. It was no longer just the absence of warmth, it was an active force that attacked every exposed part of his body. The wind drove freezing air against his face with such intensity that his skin burned before going numb. His cheeks stiffened, his lips cracked, and the feeling in his nose slowly vanished. The mountain's cold did not simply surround him, it invaded him, sinking deep into muscles and joints, slowing every reaction and dulling every sensation. His hands suffered the most. Despite thick gloves, his fingers lost their strength and coordination, trembling as he tried to grip his trekking poles. Simple actions, once automatic, now required deliberate focus. Adjusting a strap or tightening a buckle became a battle against clumsiness and pain. The cold stole precision first, then endurance. He could feel his body struggling to maintain heat, diverting energy away from movement and into survival. Fatigue deepened rapidly, not because he had climbed too far, but because the cold was draining him from the inside. Breathing grew harder with each passing minute. The air was so cold that every inhale felt like shards of glass scraping his throat and lungs. He fought the urge to breathe too quickly, knowing that panic would only worsen the strain on his body. Yet even controlled breaths felt insufficient. His chest tightened and his heart pounded violently, working overtime to push warmth to his extremities. The storm forced him into a constant balancing act between conserving energy and staying alert enough to avoid danger. As the cold intensified, pain faded into numbness, and that transition frightened him more than the pain itself. Numbness meant loss of warning. It meant he could be injured without realizing it. He flexed his fingers and toes repeatedly, forcing movement to keep sensation alive. Every small motion felt exaggerated and slow, as if his body were no longer entirely his own. The mountain was taking control bit by bit, turning him into something fragile and unresponsive. Mentally, the brutal cold blurred time and thought. Concentration became difficult as his mind struggled to stay sharp under constant physical stress. He had to remind himself of basic actions, repeating them silently like instructions. Keep moving, stay balanced, breathe steadily. The cold pressed against his thoughts just as relentlessly as it pressed against his body, threatening to overwhelm his focus. He understood then that this was how the mountain defeated people, not through sudden catastrophe, but through gradual erosion of strength and awareness. In the heart of the storm, the cold revealed its true danger. It was not dramatic or explosive. It was patient, methodical, and unforgiving. It robbed him of comfort, then control, and finally clarity. The mountain did not need avalanches or cliffs to assert its power. The cold alone was enough, and as it tightened its grip, he realized that enduring it would demand every ounce of discipline, awareness, and will he possessed. As the storm reached its peak, he found himself frozen in place, not just by the cold, but by the weight of the decision before him. The mountain had narrowed his options to two equally dangerous choices, and neither offered any certainty of survival. Moving forward blindly meant risking a misstep into unseen danger, a sudden drop, unstable snow, or hidden ice that could send him sliding into nothingness. Standing still, however, allowed the cold and exhaustion to creep deeper into his body, threatening to drain his strength and cloud his judgment. The storm had forced him into a moment where hesitation itself could be fatal. His mind raced, calculating outcomes under intense pressure. Panic hovered at the edges of his thoughts, but he fought it with discipline, knowing that fear would push him toward reckless action. He had to think clearly, even as the wind screamed around him and snow hammered against his body. The mountain demanded an answer, not in words but in action. Every second spent deciding felt stolen, yet rushing the choice could cost him everything. This was no longer a test of endurance. It was a test of decision, making under absolute uncertainty. He crouched slightly, lowering his center of gravity to resist the wind, and forced himself to pause. In that stillness, he listened, not for guidance, but for any clue the mountain might give him. The slope beneath his boots, the direction of the wind, the way snow drifted across the ground. These small details became vital information. He realized that survival would not come from bold movement, but from restraint. Charging ahead was no longer bravery, it was blindness. Waiting, observing, and choosing the least dangerous option required a different kind of courage. The cold punished his hesitation immediately. His muscles stiffened, and his hands shook as the temperature continued to fall. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to do something, anything, just to generate warmth. But he resisted that impulse, understanding that random movement could lead him straight into disaster. The mountain was forcing him to choose between impulse and intention, between fear-driven action and calculated survival. Eventually, he made his decision. He would not press forward into the unknown, nor would he surrender to the cold by standing exposed. He began searching carefully, step by step, for shelter, any break in the terrain that could offer protection from the wind. Each movement was slow and deliberate, guided by feel rather than sight. The decision did not bring relief, but it brought clarity. He had chosen survival over pride, patience over panic. In that moment, he understood how easily lives are lost on mountains, not through lack of strength, but through a single wrong choice made under pressure. The storm had trapped him not just physically, but mentally, forcing him to confront the most dangerous enemy of all, the urge to act without certainty. The mountain had presented him with its cruelest lesson yet, and whether he lived or died depended entirely on how he responded to it. When he finally managed to secure shelter and retreat into the fragile safety of his tent, the realization struck him with crushing force. The mountain was no longer testing him, it was attacking him. Until this moment, the challenges had felt like warnings, lessons delivered slowly through cold, fatigue, and isolation. But the storm marked a shift. The mountain had revealed a harsher truth, one stripped of patience or subtlety. It did not care how prepared he was, how determined he felt, or how much effort he had invested. It unleashed its power without hesitation, showing him that survival here was never guaranteed. Inside the tent, the violence of the storm became even more terrifying. The fabric snapped and strained under the force of the wind, each gust threatening to tear it free from its anchors. Snow piled relentlessly against the walls, pressing inward as if the mountain itself were trying to crush the small space he occupied. The noise was overwhelming, wind howling, fabric flapping, ice striking like thrown gravel. There was no rhythm to it, no pattern he could adapt to. The chaos was constant, and it made the mountain feel alive, hostile, and merciless. Fear settled deep in his chest, heavier than at any point before. This was not fear of discomfort or exhaustion. It was the fear of being erased. For the first time, the thought that he might not survive this climb felt real and immediate. He understood now how quickly things could end here, how thin the line was between endurance and disaster. The mountain did not need to make a dramatic move. It only had to continue doing exactly what it was doing. Time lost meaning as he waited inside the tent. Minutes stretched endlessly, each one filled with tension and uncertainty. He listened for signs that the storm might weaken, but there were none. The mountain offered no reassurance, no indication that this cruelty would pass quickly. He felt small, insignificant, and powerless in a way that stripped away all illusions of control. The confidence of earlier days felt distant, almost naive, replaced by a raw awareness of how vulnerable he truly was. Yet within that fear, something else emerged: respect. Not admiration, but a sober understanding of the mountain's true nature. This place was not an opponent to be conquered, nor a challenge designed for personal growth. It was a force that existed entirely on its own terms. Those who survived did so not because they were fearless, but because they accepted this reality and adapted to it. The mountain did not reward bravery, it punished arrogance. As the storm continued to rage outside, he realized that this moment would change him forever. The mountain had shown its first cruel face, and it had done so without warning or mercy. From this point forward, every step, every decision, and every ounce of effort would be shaped by this knowledge. Survival was no longer about proving strength or resilience. It was about humility, awareness, and the understanding that, in this frozen world, nature always held the final power.